just want to thank Joanne and all her crew for putting this great thing together every year. It's a real nice way to remember who we are as a town and to remember the history and to share our stories. So I'm just happy to be able to play some songs for you today. Enjoy it while you're eating your hamburgers and hot dogs, which are for sale up on the hill. $2.50, such a bargain. You can go see my mom over there. She'd be happy to take your money. And there's something about the day today that made me want to start with this song. How many roads must a man walk down before you can call him a man? How many seas must a white dove sail before she can sleep in the sand? How many times must a cannonball strike before they're forever banned? The answer, my friend, is blowing in the wind. The answer is blowing in the wind. Yeah. How many times can a man look up before he can see the sky? How many ears must one man have before he can hear people cry? How many deaths will it take till he knows that too many people have died? The answer, my friend, blowing in the wind. The answer is blowing in the wind. Oh my. How many years can a mountain exist before it has washed to the sea? How many years can some people exist before they're allowed to be free? How many times can a man turn his head and pretend that he just doesn't see? The answer, my friend, is blowing in the wind. The answer is blowing in the wind. The answer, my friend, is blowing in the wind. The answer is blowing in the wind. I was going to try to be funny and say, my song sheets are blowing in the wind. My tablecloths are blowing in the wind. He lived in the apple orchard in a little old orchard shack. His real name was Jackson Taylor, but I called him Applejack. Well, old Applejack was loved by everyone he ever knew. Applejack picked apples, but he picked the banjo too. Play a song for me, Applejack. Applejack, play a song for me, and I'll sing. Play a song for me, Applejack. Applejack, play a song, let your banjo ring. Well, I'd go down to Applejack's almost every day. We'd sit and we'd drink Applejack, old Applejack had made. Then he'd take his banjo down and he'd ask me if I'd sing. And he would play the banjo, I played my tambourine. Play a song for me, Applejack, Applejack, play a song for me, and I'll sing. Play a song for me, Applejack, Applejack, play a song, let your banjo ring. Well, that was many years ago, when I was very young. Now all I have is old Applejack is gone. But he left me a banjo, and it always takes me back. And every time I play it, I still hear Applejack. Play a song for me, Applejack, Applejack, play a song for me, and I'll sing. Play a song for me, Applejack, Applejack, play a song, let your banjo ring. Play a song, let your banjo ring.
I miss Skirt and I really, you know, they're all different ones. The old timers that always with you. Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's something.
That was the Dolly Parton song.
30 this year. I mean, look at how
I know. Oh, Willie, my dear, how I love you. I love you with all of my heart. Tomorrow we would have been married. The drinking has kept us apart. Beautiful, beautiful brown eyes. Beautiful, beautiful brown eyes. Beautiful, beautiful brown eyes. I'll never love blue eyes again. To the barroom he staggered. He fell down close by the door. The very last words that he uttered, I'll never get drunk anymore. Beautiful, beautiful brown eyes. Beautiful, beautiful brown eyes. Beautiful, beautiful brown eyes. I'll never love blue eyes again. Seven long years I've been married.
I know,
I wish I was single again. A woman don't know all her troubles till she's married a blue-eyed man. Beautiful, beautiful brown eyes. Beautiful, beautiful brown eyes. Beautiful, beautiful brown eyes. I'll never love blue eyes again. No, I'll never love blue eyes again. Okay. I can't hear it from here, and it sounds like it's not.
The guitar.
You're fine.
I thought so.
Yeah.
Hey, I'm listening to the guy who knows what he's doing back there. Almost heaven, West Virginia, Blue Ridge Mountain, Shenandoah. Life is old there, older than the trees, younger than the mountains, blowing like a breeze. Country roads take me home to the I belong, West Virginia, Mountain Mama, take me home, country road. All my memories gather round her, miner's lady, stranger to the world.
Who's got the beer?
Dark and dusty,
Don't look at your food when you're walking there, Louise.
Misty taste of moonshine, teardrop in my eye. Country roads take me home to the place I belong, West Virginia, Mountain Mama, take me home, country roads. I hear her voice in the morning now, she calls me. Radio reminds me of our home far away. Driving down the road, I get a feeling that I should have been home yesterday. Yesterday, country roads take me home to the place I belong, West Virginia, Mountain Mama, take me home, country roads, country roads, take me home to the place I belong, West Virginia, Mountain Mama, take me home, country roads, take me home, country roads, take me home, now country roads. Anybody here like Johnny Cash? That's too bad. Because you're going to get me doing Johnny Cash. Let's see what happens. I hear the train coming, it's rolling round the bend. I ain't seen the sunshine since I don't know when. Well, I'm stuck in Folsom Prison, and time keeps dragging on. But that train keeps rolling on down to San Antonio. When I was just a baby, my mama told me, son, always be a good boy, don't ever play with guns. Well, I shot a man in Reno just to watch him die. And I hear that whistle blowing, I hang my head and cry. smoking big cigars. Well, I know I had it coming. I know I can't be free. But those people keep a moving, and that's what tortures me. Well, if they free me from this prison, if that railroad track were mine, I bet I'd move it on a little farther down the line.
What are you selling,
Far
chairs?
from Folsom Prison, that's where I want to stay.
Well, to have some out here.
And I let that lonesome whistle blow my blues away. And I let that lonesome whistle blow my blues away. My version of Johnny Cash.
Oh, yeah. Feeling and layers.
Joanne, Brooke did a really nice job. How have you seen that exhibit upstairs?
No, I haven't gone in there.
So she has this little map out. It's almost like the kids could do it. It's a big, huge map of the kid, this one aerial photograph of the area. But then you have to Hartland Hollow. What happened to it?
Goodbye, Joe. Gotta go, me oh my
My
way.
mom's the one that wrote the book.
Me gotta go, oh, the pirogue down the
They
bayou.
read that when I was.
My Yvonne, sweetest one, me
They
on my
used to walk
way.
up. They used to come out this way.
Son of a gun, we'll have big fun on the bayou. Jambalaya, crawfish pie, leg on board.
I was really interested.
'Cause tonight I'm gonna see Mama Michelle and me. Pick guitar, fill fruit jar, and a gray
She
old.
has it designed so kids can
Son of a gun, we'll have big fun on the bayou.
really live and that kind of stuff. It's a lot. It's
Yeah, I'm gonna go in now.
Settle down, far from town, get me a pirogue, and I'll catch me all the fish on the bayou. I trade my mom to get Yvonne what you need, oh. Son of a gun, we'll have it fun on the bayou. Jambalaya, crawfish pie, filet gumbo. 'Cause tonight I'm gonna see Mama Michelle and me, oh. Pick guitar, fill fruit jar, and a gray old. Son of a gun, we'll have big fun on the bayou.
Well, his is purple too. Or not? Or tender onions. Yeah. This is Rhymes is the same as what you have. Or similar. Similar. Yeah.
If I don't know a TV door, the place is buzzing. Kinfolk come save on by the dozen. Dress in style, go hog wild, me oh my oh. Son of a gun, we'll have big fun on the bayou. Jambalaya, crawfish pie, filet gumbo. 'Cause tonight I'm gonna see Mama Michelle and me, oh. Pick guitar, fill fruit jar, and a gray old. Son of a gun, we'll have big fun on the bayou. Yeah, son of a gun, gonna have big fun on the bayou. Yeah. I got a few more songs here, and I think we'll be starting the stories and the history and all the fun stuff. And then after that, we're gonna get to eat some blueberry desserts. My favorite part of the day.
Right.
Hi. Hi.
Nice day, huh?
Beautiful.
day.
Hi, Sally. How are you?
Hi, good. How are you doing?
Carolyn's here too. I just said to John, there's Carolyn.
No cooler pets. Got no cigarettes over 2 hours pushing through my room. And about 12 o'clock means by the week. 35 car midnight train. Destination rain on worn out suits and shoes. I don't pay no union dues. I smoke old stogies. I have found.
We'll see how that goes. I know. Right, Sally?
Every engineer on every train. All of the children. And all of their
She's gone so much. I never when did you come back?
The first part of April, just before
Now,
Easter.
see, that's the first time I've seen her. She looks good. So you like it out there?
Well,
Carol,
I like the kids. I like the kids.
Cheryl.
Don't
Well, you had brown hair then. I had brown hair. I wasn't 8 years old. I think about that's 10 years ago already. Do you believe that, though? That was 9 years ago. So how long have you been out?
I've been out since early July.
Okay.
And then I'll leave probably the end of September. I might stay through there. It depends on how cold I get.
I know it said, Cindy Ryan's a friend today, but I ran out of
Did
friends.
Stan come down?
So you just got
He came down for the reunion.
You wait till I get home.
Yeah.
I talked to him
they
in
stayed at my
January.
place.
I know he did. And I told him, I said, call me when you come down. I want to get together with you to visit.
Yeah.
I never heard of him.
Gee, he's fine.
going I was a little bitty boy, just up off of the
That's
floor.
why I wondered if he got
We used
down.
to go down to Grandma's house every Sunday, so
You'd never
have
really
chicken pie, turkey ham, homemade fire bread. But the best thing about Grandma's house was the great big elephant. It was 9 feet high and 6 feet wide, soft as a downy chick.
Call me when you're
It's
down.
made from the feathers of 411 geese, took a whole bunch cloth for the tent, and a whole leg kids and 4 hound dogs, and a piggy we stole from the shed. We didn't get much sleep, but we had a lot of fun at Grandma's.
I know. I thought if he got tired, he'll get back over here.
Yeah.
I got
Well, after supper we'd sit around the fire, the old folks spit and chew.
Yeah.
Pa would talk about farming the war, Granny sing about her too. And I'd sit and then watch the fire till the cobwebs filled my head. The next thing I know, I'd wake up in the morning
Right
in the
now,
middle of the
Carolyn,
weather bed.
rather than
That's
here.
9 feet high, 6 feet wide, soft as a downy chick. It's made from the feathers of 40 geese, took a whole bunch cloth for the tent, and a whole 8 kids and 4 hound dogs, and a piggy we stole from the shed. We didn't get much sleep, had a lot of fun at Grandma's.
Kick Sally out.
Well, I love my mom, I love my pa, I love Granny and Grandpa too. I've been fishing with my uncle, I wrestle with my cousin, I even kissed Aunt too. But if I ever had to make a choice, I guess it ought to be said, well, I trade them all, plus the gal down the road for Grandma's. It was 9 feet high, 6 feet wide, soft as a downy chick. It's made from the feathers of 411 geese, took a whole bunch of cloth for the tent, and a whole 8 kids and 4 hounds. No Tennessee friendship. We didn't get much sleep, but we had a lot of fun. Grandma, we didn't get much sleep, but we had a lot of fun. On Grandma's feather bed. All right, are we up?
Now, did they move into Waterman's? Did that get finished and people?
Oh yeah,
Well, that's a double decker.
Now or not now?
I
yeah.
have to ride by and.
Oh yeah, there's Waterman's. They tore it down.
I know
and
they
rebuilt.
did, and to me
Yeah.
that was sad.
And the same with Alice Kimball's. They tore
Kimball's
that.
went down too.
Yeah, remember Melinda and Jim Fuller?
That was at the beginning, wasn't it?
They lived across, well, they got a place across from the Sandy Beach.
Yeah.
And then they bought Alice Kimball's place.
I have to get this
Okay,
presentation.
so
It's going to be starting very
that's the
soon.
music for now, but I will be back a little later on.
I'm sorry.
And I am going to do the signature Blueberry song. I have to play at this festival. And I think guest speakers should be gathering, and Joanne will be introducing everyone and moving along with the ceremony. So thanks for your attention.
You'll have to at some point go over and get my little speech out of the car. It's in the yellow folder between the seats. Go on.
Okay. Hello? Can you hear me? So first, before we start, I do want to make sure you can hear me. So, hi there, Tammy. So turn it up a little bit more. How does that sound? Does that reverberate a little better? Who's over there? Allison, can you hear us? Okay, just making sure. Ted's going to move forward so he can hear us. And people gather around, actually, a little closer if you'd like to hear a little easier. One person that I'm missing is UB Parmalee. So, Kip, I do need a chair. UB, I'm going to have you sit up here with us so we're all good and go. Take one of the red chairs while you're at it.
You need a blue notebook with your number. I think it's in the door front. You know, one of those blue notebooks.
Okay, I think we have everybody set. Well, UB's on his way.
Which I can't say that to him because he just
I'm going to actually, let's see, UB's got to come in front of me. You'll trip up on this over here. I know, I'm losing myself walking fast and he goes tumbling. Nope.
Yes, I
So actually, while he's walking, I should wanted to just bring up a couple of things, just for you to be aware of what Hartland Historical Society is working towards. One is just to say we did have hail damage, like many of you probably did, and there will be a new roof on the Gaylord House and new gutters, we hope, by the end of the year. What that perpetrated, of course, would be wonderful if we can get the house painted and scraped, because I'm sure you can see it's looking a little tattered in many places. So if your pockets have a little extra change in it or whatever, and you want to donate for hoping to give us some more money to be able to get that paint and scraping done, it would be much appreciated. So we have that container up here. Also, as you walk around, you might see some books. They're trying to keep the tablecloths down, but these are, if you feel like a read, just take it home, free of charge. Just make sure the tablecloth doesn't blow over with you. So, and they're all over the place, so please help yourself. Okay, so we are going to start with our Blueberry Picnic 2019 program. I hope you can sit back and listen. It'll be just probably about under an hour, just so you know.
So hello and welcome to the 2019 Hartland Historical Society Blueberry Picnic. I am Joanne Groth, volunteer, president, and curator for the Hartland Historical Society in the Gaylord House. I would like to thank all our volunteers for all that they do to keep the Hartland Historical Society active and to help make events like this successful. It's totally a team spirit, teamwork. To thank everyone. We welcome and need those willing to give of their time and skills, so more volunteers are always welcomed at our door. So call me. I'm in the phone book. That would be the Hartland one too. And a note to that is we will be putting a new one out hopefully next year. Our program today will tell you about Hartland Hollow and the Barkhamsted Reservoir in the years 1927 through 1948 that changed the landscape in the community of Hartland. You will hear melancholy poems from a 1930s South Hollow School student who had to leave her home, and a summary of the lives and times of the Hollow. Our exhibit on the second floor displays personal artifacts and photos relating to this. And we will end with Jack Rourke's genealogy and his blueberry story that took place in 1949. So let's begin. This first piece of information is an article that originally appeared in the Connecticut Explored, formerly Hog River Journal, Volume 4, Number 1, 2005-2006, with permission for us to share. The article source was Kevin Murphy, the author of Water for Hartford, the story of the Hartford Waterworks and the Metropolitan District Commission. From 1927 until 1948, the Metropolitan District Commission, MDC, using money from the sale of water bonds, purchased land holdings in the East Branch Valley of the Farmington River. They built the Seville Dam and then flooded the valley to create the 9-mile-long Barkhamsted Reservoir. And then the project, though worthy, displaced more than 1,000 people who lived in the hollows. This is part of that story relating to Hartland Hollow. Kip Mentzer will be reading. Kip and his wife Robin moved to West Hartland in 1986. Kip is our Gaylord House maintenance chair. Kip?
Thank you. This reading is about 8 minutes long. It contains quite a bit of detail, but listen carefully. Try to find out how long it took for them to clear out the reservoir and how long did it take to actually fill the reservoir. So that's for you to figure out from this reading. Very good. Okay. As the east branch of the Farmington River tumbled swiftly through the northwestern Connecticut area, residents gave it little thought. They fished it almost year-round, catching trout, smallmouth bass, and pickerel. Nights, bands of small boys would sneak up to the black pool near the old Newgate Coon Club and fish for bullheads, which, when cooked properly, tasted every bit as good as trout. No matter the species of fish, the East Branch provided a feast for the hungry. Residents built small bridges to ford the river, which flooded its banks in the spring and kept both people and farm wagons close to home. The children loved the flooding. Until the water receded, schooling would be limited. For farmers, though, the annual spring flood simply marked the beginning of another growing season. News from the outside world followed a path dictated by terrain. It flowed up the river from the town of New Hartford through Barkhamsted Hollow and up to Hartland Hollow. Babies in the two hollows were delivered at home with a doctor visiting as soon thereafter as possible. The physician might travel from Winsted or New Hartford to two of the slightly larger towns to the south. For many years, it was the unflappable Dr. Chester English who drove his horse and buggy from New Hartford to the farms in the valley. In Hartland Hollow, there were about 25 farms and private homes. Some sat on parcels of land as small as a few acres. while others rivaled Augustine Gus Feely's 340-acre spread. Hartland Hollow was divided between the North Hollow upstream of Route 20 and the South Hollow downstream. Route 20 descended the mountain from the west more gently than it did from the east. The beat-up Macadam Road making an almost straight shot directly into the valley. Conversely, Walnut Hill Road on the east was a ledge cut, which snaked back and forth across the mountain between trees and boundaries until it finally straightened for a quick run through a 30-foot-long covered bridge over the river. In the springtime, the beautiful rose-colored flowers of the trailing arbutus bushes completely blanketed the mountain on both sides of the valley. By today's standards, life in the hollows was harsh. There was no indoor plumbing or heating except what could be furnished by wood-burning cast iron box stoves. To keep warm at night, children wrapped a towel around a flat iron or heated a and took it to bed. On Saturday nights, hot water for baths was taken from a side tank on the wood stove and poured into a galvanized tub. There was no electricity, therefore there was no radios, no telephone, or electric lights. Most people used kerosene lamps. Little did residents know that their simple, bucolic life would soon come to an end. The beginning of the end. The Metropolitan District Commission, MDC, began acquiring land holdings in the East Branch Valley in 1927, 3 years before the state legislature gave the agency permission to impound the waters of the Farmington River. The first farm acquired late in 1927 was the Stewart Farm in Hartland Hollow. The Stewarts, together with their son, daughter, and 6 grandchildren, were allowed to remain on the property for another 6 years while they looked for a new place to live. A month later, Mrs. Joanne Carrier sold her farm to the MDC and moved with her 2 daughters to Riverton in the valley of the West Branch. Late the following year, the MDC bought 2 more farms, the 220-acre Waldo Miller Farm and the 256-acre Wilbur Miller property. 2.5 years after the first purchase, and just before the General Assembly granted the MDC its charter, the agency bought J. Alfred Cable's 200-acre parcel. The Cyrus Miller Tavern and its 20 acres followed. Things moved quickly for the MDC now, and they picked up Anne Scram's 80 acres in April 1930. And the Fred Stevens Farm, 95 acres, 2 months later. Just before Christmas, the MDC bought the 43-acre farm where young Pauline Emmerich had watched her house burned to the ground just 6 years before. In June 1931, the MDC bought 208 acres from Leon Dickinson in Hartland Hollow, and a month later, the Clifford Gables Farm. Soon thereafter, the MDC closed on another large piece of property, Byron Stratton's Place, gaining 344 acres. Some sales affected folks more than others. It was an enormous blow when the 160-acre Talcott Banning Farm was sold. On the surface, it might have looked like the loss of just another homestead, along with the usual livestock, until one considered the owner's little sideline. Banning ran an illegal distillery. During those thirsty Prohibition years, he produced enough hard cider and apple brandy for everyone in the hollows. Just before Thanksgiving, 1931, it was Augustine C. Feely's turn to sell his land. He did so in a big way because he owned 2 farms. He sold his own place, 345 acres, and the smaller Robert Stewart Sr. farm. Feely was a practical man, sensing the futility of a long, exhausting battle with a preordained outcome. He simply accepted the NDC's offer and moved on. Early in 1932, the Metropolitan District set the contract for the clearing of the site where the new Seville Dam would be located, and in January held a most unusual meeting at the Hartford Club. The desperation of the times was evident as MDC Chairman Charles Goodwin announced that, owing to the horrendous condition of the bond markets in New York, he would have to call a halt to the land purchases in the East Branch Valley. However, exactly 2 weeks after the Water Board voted for a moratorium, they received an offer of sale from the heirs of the Ford Brothers farm, and they were back in the land buying business. In Hartland Hollow, the Newgate Coon Club turned out to be the last private building to be surrendered. The 100 members of the club were mostly from Granby, with a smattering of men from the Hollows. After considerable negotiations, the old Newgate Coon Club, together with its 89 acres, was sold to the NDC for $24,000. After everyone was out of the valley, in the summer of 1936, S. Groves, a stripping company from Ridgefield, New Jersey, descended into the Hollows. The contract called for scorched earth in the 1,100-acre basin where the reservoir would sit. The work began in November and was completed the following August. Times were tough, and local people were not too proud to work for Groves, sometimes stripping land formerly owned by their own kin, neighbors, and friends. Using 2-man whipsaws, the 75 workers felled towering hardwoods from morning till night. Trees, brush, house parts, barnwood, and old farm implements were stacked in an enormous pile in the center of A.C. Feely's former tobacco fields. A local man, Paul Crunden, estimated the pile to be 60 feet tall and said that when it was set ablaze, the flames licked the clouds. By the time Groves was done, there was nothing left in the valley but empty cellar holes. And finally, the last paragraph, the last dance. The MDC had told the residents of Hartland Hollow that their town hall would be the last building demolished, and the agency kept its word. The former residents wanted to have their 1940 Halloween dance in the old building. Former neighbors came from far and wide in their old Fords, Chevrolets, Plymouths, and rusty farm pickups. That fall was the last time they cast their ballots there too. After selling their land, most folks had bought new farms and started over. They moved to Granby, Suffield, Winstead, New Hartford, Riverton, Pine Meadow, and Canton. A short time later, and just ahead of the rising waters, the MDC gave the order, and the 80-year-old town hall was burned to the ground. Eventually, Hartland Hollow slipped beneath the waters of the Barkhamsted Reservoir. But the whole 9-mile-long catchment took 8 years to fill. Water finally crested over the spillway at the Seville Dam for the first time in 1948.
Thank you. Great. Awesome. So when you go up to the second floor in the house, you will see those pictures of the homes that were there in the valley and the illustration that shows where they stood at one time. So I hope you enjoy that. And the information is on the wall, gives you what their names were and where they are buried. Most of them came back to Hartland to rest. Next, we will hear about the when and what occurred with the building of the Barkhamsted Reservoir. Susan Pearson researched and put together this timeline summary. Her sources were the Metropolitan District, Hartford, Connecticut website, Kevin Murphy book, Water for Hartford, the story of the Hartford Waterworks and the Metropolitan Commission, the Stanley Ransom book, History of Hartland, the 69th town of the colony of Connecticut, and the Pauline Emmerich Scarrett book, Hartland Hollow, the Doomed Town. These last two books can be purchased here today. Sue, you want to tell us about yourself?
Good afternoon. Everybody hear me? Okay? Yeah, good. All right, and thanks to Joanne for giving my references. I also want to let everybody know that this excellent Water for Hartford book is available for loan in the public library here in Hartland, and I recommend it if anybody's interested in finding out more about not just the building of the Barkhamsted Reservoir, but also the whole history of the MDC. For those of you who don't know me, I'm a fourth generation summer resident of East Hartland, and my husband and I moved up here permanently in 1987. But I grew up with the story of the Barkhamsted Reservoir building, what happened to the farms in the hollow. This was part of, what we talked about around the dinner table, and after dinner we'd go off and have a ride to see the beautiful reservoir that is now where Hartland Hollow used to be. So I put together this timeline. We had a hike earlier this year down to the reservoir's edge. MDC gave the permission to the Hartland Land Trust to take this hike as part of Connecticut Trails Day. I know a couple of you who are here today also went on that hike, and we didn't get as good a view of the reservoir as we wanted, but it still was kind of fun to be down there. So the timeline. This story began in 1911 when the Connecticut legislature authorized construction of the Nepog and what was called the compensating reservoirs. The compensating reservoir, known today as Lake McDonough, was built to compensate the mill owners downstream from the Nepog Reservoir for the expected reduced water flow. The Hartford Waterworks, which was the predecessor of the Metropolitan District Commission, which we usually call the MDC, to increase the flow of the Farmington River as needed as it exited the compensating reservoir. Between 1927 and 1931, 11,457 acres, or more than 18 square miles of land in the East Branch, Farmington River Valley, were purchased by the Hartford Waterworks and the MDC in anticipation of the building of the Barkhamsted Reservoir. Located in Hartland Hollow in 1927 were two schools, the Hartland Town Hall, the Newgate Coon Club, a cemetery, and some 28 homes and farms. Hollow residents were allowed the right to appeal the MDC's offering price for their property, but ultimately all accepted purchase offers. The town was compensated for the town hall and school buildings. The MDC also arranged to move the graves in the cemetery, mostly to a new cemetery here in West Hartland. The MDC also paid for the construction of the new Route 20 that now connects East and West Hartland. And just as a matter of interest, it takes 7 miles to get from one town center to another, whereas it used to take 3 when you used to be able to go through the hollow. In 1929, legislation was introduced for the construction of the Barkhamsted Reservoir, but it failed to pass at that time. In 1930, what was called the East Branch Water Supply Act passed the Connecticut legislature, authorizing the MDC to impound the waters of the East Branch of the Farmington River and to begin construction of the reservoir. In 1934, 4 years later, the plans for the reservoir were approved and construction began on a tunnel to divert the East Branch of the Farmington River and to build what was initially called the Bills Brook Dam, later renamed the Seville Dam in honor of Caleb Mills Seville, the manager and the brilliant chief engineer for the MDC, who served from 1912 until his retirement in 1948 at age 82. Between 1935 and 1936, concrete was poured for the dam's core wall and earth from the upstream valley floor. And earth from the upstream valley floor was laid on both sides of the core wall. So if you're walking or driving across the dam these days, you're actually driving or walking across land from Hartland Hollow. 1936 to 1940, granite blocks were laid to form the causeway and the upper gatehouse, that beautiful little circle building that we all love, and the dam face was landscaped. In 1940, dam construction was completed, and the aqueduct that would in the future carry water from the Barkhamsted Reservoir to the Nepog Reservoir, and from there to the West Hartford filtration plant was closed, which started the process of filling the Barkhamsted Reservoir. And as Kip mentioned earlier, it took until 1948 until the Barkhamsted Reservoir was filled to capacity. It holds 30 million gallons, according to the MDC. It's the largest water supply reservoir in Connecticut. As Kip mentioned, 9 miles long. It's almost 1 mile wide in spots. And it was constructed at a total cost of $10 million. And now Hartford has some of the most delicious water in the world. And we lost Hartland Hollow in the bargain. But that's the story.
Thank you, Susan.
Okay, to complete the story of the Hartland Hollow and the Barkhamsted Reservoir, Darcy Lovell has put together a summary of the community's lifestyle and some of its noted individuals that made up Hartland Hollow. Darcy used our Hartland Hollow Doomtown book for this. Darcy, she was unable to be here today, but she grew up in West Hartland in a home that was actually a part of the Dickinson homestead in the Hollow. Our speaker today will be Scott Levan. Scott resides in East Hartland, is one of our selectmen, and is married to Amy DiGagostino, maiden name, a relative of the Leon and Laura Welch Dickinsons from the Hollow. Scott will tell us more.
Before it was flooded, Hartland Hollow was home to a vibrant community with businesses, farmers, and families, calling the Doomtown home. Second, I gotta put my glasses on. The town bustled with commerce, with services for dressmaking, housework, laundry, ironing, cleaning, the schools, and for manual labor such as cutting and splitting wood. Sawmills produce shingles, tool handles, chair seats, ox bows, lumber, and wooden rails. The birch tree mill owned by Leon Dickinson produced birch oil. Local trees were cut and sold for $3 per ton. Lumber produced in the town was sold to Chapin Stevens Rule Company in Pine Meadow, the Gilbert Clock Company, and the J.C. Burrell in Winstead. The distilleries owned by the Talcott Banning and Leon Dickinson produced a cider and cider brandy with apples grown by the neighbors. Goods and crops produced in the town were sold to and bartered with neighbors and sold to Jordan's store in Riverton, to the Riverton General Store. and 2 stores in Winsted and Barkhamsted. Residents also went to the Granville store to buy tobacco, seeds, kerosene, grain, household items, and to sell their own products in exchange for flour, sugar, and other staples. Ice was harvested from the river, and products like milk and other perishables were packed in a shed insulated with sawdust before making the trip by horse and buggy to Hartford, where they were sold to Bryant and Chapman. By 1913, cars were being mass-produced, and gasoline in the 1920s cost 17 cents a gallon. Although cars became more widely available, people still used horse and buggy or wagon to travel to church, to stores, from town to town, and for mail delivery. Horse-drawn machinery was necessary for much of the farming and physical work in town. A horse-drawn mobile saw was used to cut wood for families and for the school in town. A horse-drawn hay baler, the only one owned by a Hartland Hollow resident, was offered for service to neighbors, and horse-drawn equipment was used to set tobacco plants and to plow fields for planting. The first plow used in the hollow is on display in our tool room. Farmers in town produced broadleaf tobacco for cigar wrappers, potatoes, silage, corn, hay, vegetables, strawberries, blueberries, blackberries, apples, and nuts. In addition, vegetables and fruits were prepared and canned for winter supply. They also raised sheep, lambs, chickens, cows, turkeys, horses, pigs, and oxen. These livestock animals produced wool, salt pork, lamb, and poultry. Meats and poultry were processed and cured to be used or stored for winter. Dairy farms were owned by Clifford Cable, J. Alfred Cable, and Leon Dickinson, Augustine Gus Feely, Waldo W. Miller, and Brian Stratton, and produced milk, butter, milk, cream, and eggs, which sold for 22 cents per dozen. Farmers who raised honeybees also produced honey and honeycombs. The residents of the Hollow also produced maple syrup and sugar, just like residents still do today. Farm hands who were local neighbors were paid 50 cents per day for working on neighbors' farms. Laborers working in the valley on town roads and bridges earned $1.50 per day, which was raised to $3.50 per day in the 1930s. Families in the town also provided for themselves by hunting local game such as raccoons, rabbits, gray squirrels, foxes, and otters, and as well as fishing for native trout and eels. This provided both meat and furs for the families to use themselves or to sell. In the home, people used kerosene lamps, candles, and cast iron wood-burning stoves for cooking and heat. Without indoor running water, residents used water wells and kitchen hand pumps for cooking, washing, and other household needs. Without refrigeration, some people also used cold water springs to keep fish, milk, and other items cold. Families had up to 10 children, all born in the Hollow. Folks attended church services at the congregational churches and attended suppers in both East and West Hartland. People in town also enjoyed picnic lunches and dancing at the town hall and at Hayes Hall. In the summer, folks enjoyed living from the ledges near the old Newgate Coon Club into the Black Hole. Yeah, they went diving, yeah. In the gorge to cool off. Other popular pastimes included playing baseball, hopscotch, checkers, ice skating, sledding, and swimming, as well as sewing and cushion. The old Newgate Coon Club, in its earliest days, was the Red Lion Inn, and later the Barnes family home. The club was established in 1911 by sportsmen, mostly from Granby. They came to the Hollow for weekend entertainment where members held clam bakes, ladies' night with steak dinners, and sing-alongs. In addition to the active social community in town, Hartland Hollow was home to 2 schoolhouses for the town children. Children often walked for miles or more to get to school. There was no bus to the high school until 1932. So before that time, high school-age students would board with relatives in Winstead to attend the school there. For the younger students, there was a school in the North Hollow and one in the South Hollow to attend. The teachers, Mildred French, Amy Miller, Nellie Barnes, Leslie Feely, Kathleen Vino, Dorothy Lyons, and Georgina Feely, and Margaret Healy, would board in Hollow homes with the Dickinson family. The Stevens family and others who lived close by, if they were not a resident of the Hollow, I apologize. And like their students, the teachers sometimes walked 3 miles to get to school. Because of long walking commute for both students and teachers, school was canceled by heavy snow and flooding of the river. The North Hollow School burned down in 1870, was rebuilt in 1872, remodeled in 1913, and finally closed in 1931. The South Hollow School was closed in 1933. The schoolhouses contained desks, benches, slate, chalkboards, cast iron stoves, water buckets, and an American flag. They also had one outdoor privy and and woodshed. The one classroom housed all 8 grades of students together. Hartland Hollow had its own cemetery. In 1811, Selectmen Samuel L. Blakesley and George F. Miller worked to found the town cemetery, seeing to it that a certain piece of land be used by the town inhabitants for a burial ground. In the back of the cemetery were unmarked graves in what was called the Potter's Field. Hartland Hollow also had an active civic and political scene. The town hall was built in 1860 in the South Hollow and held town meetings, elections. The last national election was held November 10th, 1940. Religious services and social activities like the 4th of July picnics and cattle shows in the fall. There were very many prominent political leaders in town. Representatives to the General Assembly were Fred Stevens, Leon Dickinson, Wilbur Miller, and Brian Stratton. Fred Stevens was a register of voters and an auditor for the town of Hartland. Leon Dickinson was a charter member of the Historical Society and a member of the Cemetery Association for West Hartland. Byron Stratton was on the Board of Relief in Hartland and one of the original signers with the Historical Society, organized in 1954. Leanna Cables was postmistress in her home, and Leanna Stewart delivered mail by horse and buggy. Talcott Banning was the tax collector and postmaster. Walter Stewart was 3rd selectman and worked on the town roads. Augustine C. Feely was a member of the Hartland Board of Education and was town clerk and treasurer and a representative to the state legislature. Waldo Miller was the town assessor. George Miller was the town clerk at first selectman. Edith Miller was involved in World War I and World War II finance programs in the Hartland School Board and served in General Assembly at the MDC Water District's Legislative Committee. Wilbur Miller was chairman of the Republican Party of Hartland for 40 years, health officer, town clerk, and first selectman for 37 years, where he was responsible for improving town roads, negotiations with the MDC on the sale of roads, bridges, schoolhouse, and Town Hall, and participated in negotiations for the removal of the cemetery before flooding of the hollow.
Thank you, Scott. A lot of information to kind of take in. Thank you very much. So as you can see, it was very vibrant down in the hollow. We were very much civic-oriented, and that was definitely a loss for us. But we also have it that Talcott Bannon was, I don't know, he was what? He was the treasurer and the postmaster, and it was a distillery in town? Lots of skills. I would like to end this portion of the program with 2 poems. They were written by Laura Feely. So you've heard the Feely name. She was a South Hollow student at the time, and she was a daughter of Augustine, known as Gus, and Leslie Miller Feely. The poems speak for themselves. Our speaker is Terry Atwood. Terry is a fairly new resident of East Hartland and is our newly appointed membership chair and contributing editor for the Chronicler newsletter. So Terry?
The first poem is called A Farewell to Hartland by Laura Feely. Alas, the time is drawing near when I'll depart from Hartland dear, from all the spots I loved so well, and go to another town to dwell. Little I thought when but a babe, and first on Hartland's ground I played, I'd live to see the terrible day when people would take our land away. I recall many a foolish word I've spoke about Hartland going up in smoke. But indeed those words are changed around. Soon water will flood acres of ground. Wherever I may go or stray, I'll remember Hartland far away. Those hills are so steadfast and true, as I am striving to be too. Hartland, if I must say goodbye, do not weep or do not cry. Remember this, I'll always care for you, beloved Hartland fair. And she wrote a second poem called A Remembrance of Hartland Hollow. Remember those days in the valley, my dear, in that valley long days ago, how we as children used to play in the summer sun and the winter snow. Our hearts those days were life and free, and we never had cause to weep. But those days with its valley are memories now. There the water will someday sweep. Remember that farm in the valley, my dear, where our happiest days were spent. The house, the barn, they were once our joys. To them our pride was lent. And today they are gone forever, so why should we wail or weep? Keep bright the light of memory's star, and let the waters sweep. Remember the valley itself, my dear, that valley of happiness past, how it used to enfold us every one. Oh, it was too good to last. The memory of it is all we have, the best that we could keep, and that memory of it will always be bright, where the waters will someday sweep. Remember all in the valley, my dear, the school we once did dread, the brook, the river, the dear old inn. In our hearts they will never be dead. But dear, remember that you and I, with the memories we can keep, will keep alive that valley gone by, where the waters will someday sweep.
Thank you, Terry. They get me every time, actually, when I hear it. It's been sad times. So that was our first, hello motorcycles. That's our first portion of the program. We want to switch gears for our ending. And we're going to switch gears to the subject of an early settler of the West Mountain and blueberries. Yay! To end our presentation and let you get to the blueberry desserts, hear more music, and view the exhibit, let's give a few more minutes to listen to Jack Rourke's family history and his blueberry story. I'm going to tell you a little genealogy about Jack Rourke. Jack Rourke, who passed earlier this year, may he rest in peace, had just donated to the Hartland Historical Society many Bates family tools and had told us his blueberry story at our 2017 picnic. On collecting information, I came to realize that Jack on his mother's side was a descendant of the early Hartland settler, Stephen Bates. I would like to tell you a summary of his ancestors before we have his blueberry story told. It started with Stephen Bates, who was born in 1777 in Durham, Connecticut. He came to the West Mountain of Hartland sometime before 1800 and had a home in the Hartland Pond area and later on Mill Street. Displayed here, for your liking, is a rendition of his home for you to see. He was a farmer, and in History of Hartland by Stanley Ransom, it states, Bates Mill on Mill Street in West Hartland was originally built by Abel Brace and Stephen Bushnell in 1792. This was operated as a corn mill for a number of years, and it later came in the possession of the Bates family, who converted the mill to the manufacture of shovel and hoe handles together with wood panes. This mill was located on the Dean Brook, which was in the deep ravine at the south end of the bridge crossing the stream at the present-day Pinehurst Road. That would be the road around Pinehurst Lake. Stephen Bates married Matilda Beach of Litchfield in Hartland in 1803. They had 12 children and lived and died in West Hartland. Stephen in 1846 and Matilda 1875. Stephen and Matilda's son Howell married Abigail Beach in 1848 in Hartland. Their home in Howell's turning shop was located on Mill Street. They also lived and died there 1896 and 1898 respectively. Howell's and Abigail's son, Stephen, married Arencia Banning from East Hartland in 1870. They also lived on Mill Street, with Stephen dying there and his wife Abigail in Torrington, 1902 and 1923 respectively. Steve and Arencia's son, Charles, is the one some of you might have known. He was born on the West Mountain in 1879 and married Adele Swaller of East Hartland in 1909. Charles and Adele Bates lived in Torrington when first married and had their first daughter, Frances, in 1910, followed by Mildred, who became Mildred Bull, and Vesta, who became Vesta Richards. They returned to East Hartland possibly around 1918, where they lived and died 1958 and 1950, respectively. Their daughter, Frances, married Frank Rourke in New York in 1937 and eventually came back to live in East Hartland. Their son, Jack Rourke, came along in 1940 and was known to stay with his grandparents, Charles and Adele, during the summer. Jack came to live at his grandparents' home on South Road until his passing this February. His sisters are Joan Carew and recently passed Gail Adele Sinlin. An interesting note is Adele's parents, John and Roselia Swaller, came from France, married in 1884 and made their home in East Hartland. They had 4 girls and 2 boys. The girls married, the sons did not. The girls lived in Hartland or had a summer home here. Mary Rose married Constant Gower. Adele married Charles Bates. Leona married Irving Roberts. And Josephine married Coswell, Doney, as he was known, Williams. So to Jack's memory and ancestral connection to Hartland, we will tell his blueberry story. And to tell that story is Eubie Parmalee. He is also a direct descendant of an early settler and resides in East Hartland. And Eubie will tell us a little bit about your connection with Jack, and we'll read a story. And thank you all. I'm going to make one comment so I don't forget. Those are free vegetables down there if anyone feels to bring one home. Help yourself. Yeah, let's put you over here. Can you do that?
My name is Hubert Parmley, as most of you know, and I've lived here forever, it seems like. I got to get my 2 cents in on the MDC before we move on. It was filling up in the early 1940s, and my father was very interested in the project, like a lot of the local people. Kenneth Hayes, that was Russell Hayes' brother, was a patrolman for the MDC, and one Sunday my father convinced Kenneth Hayes to take us down and see what was left, because it was filling up. So we drove down there, and Kenneth drove us down in his so-called police car, I believe, and we walked down to the water's edge, and we could look out and see the old bridge across the river, and there probably was, I'm guessing, maybe 10 feet of water on it, and that was the last time that my father was ever down there at that point. But that's my 2 cents on the MDC. Okay, back to Jack Rourke. My first memory of Jack was when he used to ride around with his grandfather, Charlie Bates, in a 4-wheel horse-drawn wagon. I guess I probably was a little bit envious that that little boy had a nice ride behind the horse. They'd go through town. Mr. Bates would be working around for various people, and they'd go by and, on a pretty regular basis sometime. Fast forward, I never really was involved with Jack much until we got post-teenager stage. And in the fall of 1959, Jack and I and I believe Teddy Olson, we enlisted in the Army Reserve and went to Fort Dix for basic training, and then to Fort Sam Houston in San Antonio, Texas, for continuation of our training. Fort Sam Houston was reputed to be the country club of Army bases because it was the medical training center, and their country club reputation was because they had 3 swimming pools. I never saw a swimming pool, and it was cold all the time I was there. It was in the wintertime, but it was a lot better than the snow we had here. My one adventure at Fort Sam, I remember there was a place north of the city called Camp Bullis, B-U-L-L-I-S, and that's where they went out for various activities, and we went out there for a simulated atomic attack. Well, I volunteered to be a patient. I laid on a stretcher in the sun all day, and I was sick the next day from exposure. And Jack Rourke, he was somewhat of a amateur baseball pitcher, and he spent most of his time that day throwing rocks at the armadillos. End of that. Now I'll get to Jack's story here. One more thing on Jack. In the early 1960s, we were both looking for jobs, and I was 3 years older than him. I was out of school, and he was still going to school, and he had a part-time job. But we went to this place in downtown Hartford called the Plus School of Business. They were just getting started, and we both took an aptitude test there, and we both killed the test. We got a real good mark on it. They were allegedly impressed that we got such a high score. Maybe they were trying to flatter us, but they were in this stuff called computer programming. That's not going to be anything. Skip that. We didn't want to learn that because that was never going to amount to anything. So we didn't do it. Probably big mistake. Okay, Jack Rourke originally read this at the Blueberry Picnic here in 2017. When I was 9 years old, I lived at the Bates Farm, which is my house now. And I had a blueberry stand, like a lemonade stand, and we would pick blueberries. We had low bush, we didn't have high bush. And my grandmother would help me pick. I was 9 years old, and you know those older ladies, they always had an apron. They would gather the corners and everything went in that apron, and then they would dump. But anyway, I had like 5 or 6 quarts of berries in this little stand sitting by the road, Route 179 South Road. When I was 9 years old, it was 1949, and you could count the cars that went by there all day on one hand and have fingers left over. There was just no traffic. So I would sit there like a little kid, and all of a sudden this guy pops up, all well-dressed and hat on and everything, in this big car. I didn't know cars back then. He buys 6 quarts of my blueberries. I said, wow, all in one day, you know. So I run in to tell my grandmother, look, I sold all my berries. So she said, we better pick again. So out we go and pick another 6 quarts, plop them down there. And the next day, here comes the same guy. He said, those were the best berries I've ever had. Clean picked, no green ones, no leaves, no stems, he said. I'll tell you what, he says, I'm going to be coming through here about 4 o'clock tonight. I'd like a bushel. At 9 years old, I didn't know what a bushel was. So then I ran and told my grandmother we need a bushel of blueberries by 4 o'clock. She gets on the phone and calls our neighbors. Where we lived, we were all cousins, relatives, and there were really no other houses. Where Sunset Road branches off, which is Westwoods now, the only house that was there was Clara Clark. She was a Gower. The next house was Connie Gower, and the next house was Roberts, and there was nothing in between. Everybody had blueberries back then. They came from all over to pick blueberries, and then going the other way was Aggie Raby. She was a Williams. There was Florence Crowley, also a Williams. Their mother was Josephine. At any rate, there was 8 of them. In fact, I was going to bring my slideshow and make an imaginary thing, so I would say, here's a slide, and when I would go like this, click, it's a slide, and you would have to imagine 8 people standing there. Florence Crowley, Aggie Raby, their mother, my grandmother, Adele Bates, Clara Clark, and daughter Beatrice, Lenora Roberts, and Connie Gower, all standing there ready to pick blueberries. Everyone my grandmother called came because we had to have a bushel by 4 o'clock. And the next slide click where they're all bending over. Oh, I guess I shouldn't show that slide. At any rate, we picked that bushel of berries and my grandmother made me pay them 15 cents a quart. But I was selling them for 40 cents a quart, so I was ready to do another bushel. But that is really kind of the story. But I never expected to do that again, because if you lived around here that time, there was nobody went down that road. There was nobody that went down that road to have this guy pop up out of nowhere and buy all my berries and a whole bushel the next day. Amazing.
Thank you, Yubi. The wind decided to pick up on us. Woo! Pardon us. You can just stay there, Yubi, be just fine. Yeah. I'll share the spotlight with you. Okay, so that actually, sorry, the wind blew my page away, so this actually ends our program. And you're also nice and quiet, waiting for something else to come to be, but we are...
I'm going to interject something here. If you have not had the opportunity to go upstairs and to see the display, I just want to say that on the second floor, there's a display of Hartland Hollow. And this lady here, along with some other people, put together this display that's amazing.
It's awesome.
So when we, yes, some of you have seen it. If you haven't seen it, you got to go up on the second floor. You have to look at the display about Hartland Hollow and all the pictures, and there's a map there. I would challenge you, if your house was built before 1934, find your house on the map. If it was built after 1934, find where your house, where your land was. Anyway, I just encourage you to see the display because it's really, really awesome.
Thank you, Kip. That was great. Yeah. There is a very cool map up there that's before the reservoir. So you can actually see the East Branch River and where it actually flowed back before the reservoir. And you can notice the little miniature, all of the agriculture that was the fields, the broadleaf tobacco fields, etc. But they're tiny. There are a little bit of paper there to tell you what streets you're looking at. It's pretty cool. So, yes, the end of the program. I thank you for coming. I hope you do enjoy the exhibit. And remember, donations at any time was also helpful, and your time and skill is also always helpful. a note, our fall meeting is going to be about one-room schoolrooms. From Mike Day from the Barkhamsted Historical Society is going to put a presentation on for us to give us a little more insight on one-room schoolhouses. So again, enjoy blueberry desserts, some more music, and see you next year. Thank you.